The pencil hesitates for just a moment before touching the paper. Outside the bakery, the wind rolls in from the sea, sharp with salt and engine smoke. Gray clouds press low over the French coast, swallowing the cliffs and muting the sound of waves crashing far below. War has taught the village to listen carefully, and today even the silence feels heavy. The boy does not understand any of this. He is not thinking about armies or bunkers or invasion plans. He is simply waiting for his father to finish work. His school satchel rests beside him. The bakery door opens and closes behind him, releasing warmth, coal smoke, and the familiar smell of fresh bread. Across the narrow road, German trucks pass slowly, their canvas covers snapping in the wind. Boots strike stone. Commands are whispered, not shouted. The soldiers do not look at the boy. Children are invisible during war until they are not. The boy lowers his head and begins to draw. He sketches the road, the bakery wall, a low stone structure behind it that most villagers barely notice anymore. He adds a set of steps that lead downward, half hidden by shadow. He draws crates being carried below ground and a wire that disappears into the rock. He does not know what it means. He only draws what he sees. Beneath the village, concrete walls hum faintly. Machines pulse. Men speak into radios, their voices swallowed by layers of stone. Orders move through cables buried deep in the earth, carrying information meant only for German command. This place is not supposed to exist. Across occupied Europe, Nazi engineers have hidden hundreds of installations like this one, bunkers carved into cliffs. Command posts buried beneath farms, shops, and homes, structures designed to vanish even from the people living above them. This bunker was meant to survive bombs, artillery, and invasion. What it was not designed to survive was a schoolboy with a pencil. Within months, Allied intelligence officers will study lines, drawn without intent. They will compare shadows, angles, and distances. They will realize that something vital has been revealed by accident, a secret that should have remained buried, a discovery that will quietly influence the largest invasion in history. And it all begins here, on a cold afternoon, with a child who has no idea that history is unfolding beneath his feet. How could a secret Nazi bunker, engineered to remain invisible, be revealed without sabotage, betrayal, or espionage? That question would later trouble Allied intelligence officers reviewing reports from occupied France. The information was incomplete, strangely civilian in nature, and lacked any direct military source. Yet the details refused to be dismissed. By 1943, German forces along the French coast were working relentlessly to prepare for an Allied invasion that everyone knew was coming. Concrete fortifications stretched for miles, buried beneath cliffs and disguised as natural rock. Camouflage was precise. Construction schedules were fragmented. Local civilians were kept deliberately ignorant. Even German soldiers stationed nearby often knew only what they needed to know. The bunker near the village was one such installation. It did not appear on captured German maps. It did not show clearly on aerial photographs. It generated no obvious radio traffic that could be easily traced. To Allied planners, it simply did not exist. And yet, fragments of information began to surface. British intelligence files from late 1943 mention an unconfirmed coastal command site, described not by resistance fighters or captured soldiers, but through civilian observation. There were references to unusual supply movements, repeated truck routes, and unexplained power usage in a rural area with no factories or infrastructure. Most unusually, one report mentioned a drawing, not a blueprint, not a photograph, a child's sketch. At first glance, the document seemed almost laughable. Intelligence. Analysts were trained to separate fact from rumor, and occupied Europe was full of exaggerated stories. civilians often mistook ordinary troop movements for secret operations. Children, especially, were not considered reliable observers. But something about this case stood out. The drawing showed depth, perspective, consistency. It depicted a structure that should not have been there, with proportions that did not match any known civilian building. The steps descended too steeply. The walls were too thick. The layout suggested purpose, not coincidence. This raised a troubling possibility. What if the Germans had succeeded too well in hiding their bunker? What if the very measures designed to erase its presence had instead made it noticeable to someone untrained, unafraid, and unconditioned to look away? Children did not understand secrecy. They did not recognize restricted zones. They noticed repetition, patterns, and shapes. They remembered details adults trained themselves to forget for survival. The mystery was no longer whether the bunker existed. The mystery was how many other secrets had been overlooked, simply because no one thought to listen to the smallest witnesses of war. Somewhere along the Atlantic coast, beneath an ordinary village, a structure built to shape the coming invasion had been exposed by accident. The question now was what to do with that knowledge, and whether the Germans would realize what had been lost before it was too late. The village sat quietly between farmland and sea, its stone houses pressed together as if for protection. Narrow roads curved naturally with the land, leading past weathered walls, shuttered windows, and small gardens that no longer produced enough to matter. Before the war, fishermen rose early and returned by noon. Now, the horizon belonged to patrol boats, and the sea felt watched. At the center of village life stood the bakery. Every morning before sunrise, Marcel unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of flour, yeast, and coal dust. Baking was rhythm, and rhythm was survival. He measured by instinct, kneaded by feel, and worked quietly, conserving energy and attention. The oven still burned, but rationing had changed everything. Every loaf was counted. Every mistake mattered. German soldiers arrived shortly after dawn. They lined up without speaking, helmets tucked under their arms, boots echoing sharply against the stone floor. Their uniforms were clean, their faces tired. Marcel handed over bread, stamped ration cards, and avoided eye contact. The exchange was wordless, efficient, and tense. When the soldiers left, the bakery seemed smaller, heavier. Behind the building, a narrow service road ran toward the cliffs. It had once been used for deliveries and carts. Under occupation, it carried German trucks instead. They came often, sometimes late at night, sometimes before dawn. Their engines never lingered long, but they always stopped beyond view. Marcel noticed the changes without acknowledging them. The flour deliveries grew larger, though bread production stayed the same. Crates arrived that never entered the bakery. At night, a faint vibration traveled through the floorboards, subtle enough to ignore, strong enough to feel. Marcel told himself it was machinery somewhere else, something unrelated. His son spent most afternoons near the shop. The boy was quiet, curious, and observant. School lessons were irregular now, so he waited while his father worked, sketching to pass the time. Paper was precious, pencils worn short, but drawing required no permission. He drew streets, buildings, people, and trucks. He drew what remained constant. He noticed the low stone structure behind the bakery. Older villagers remembered it as storage, but its door was newer, repainted frequently in dull gray. He noticed steps behind it that seemed deeper than necessary, leading downward instead of up. He noticed soldiers carrying crates below, ground and returning empty-handed. So he drew those details. Not to record history, not to expose secrets, simply because they existed. Marcel rarely looked at the drawings. To him, they were harmless distractions. He was focused on survival, on keeping his family fed, on avoiding attention. He believed his life would never intersect with the war in any meaningful way. He was wrong, because beneath his bakery, beneath his routine, something extraordinary was taking shape, and without realizing it, his son had begun to capture the outline of a secret that was never meant to be seen. As weeks passed, the village settled into a tense rhythm shaped by occupation. Life continued, but nothing felt accidental anymore. German patrols increased without warning, appearing on corners where they had never stood before. Certain footpaths were suddenly blocked by signs written in harsh black letters. Areas once ignored were now watched closely. Marcel noticed everything. The trucks behind the WWII bakery began arriving with greater frequency. Their engines were muffled, but the timing was precise. Always after dark, always gone before sunrise. Soldiers unloaded crates quickly, moving with rehearsed efficiency. No one spoke. No lights were used. The rear of the bakery became a place people avoided without discussing why. The sound beneath the floor grew stronger. It was not loud, but it was constant. A deep mechanical hum vibrated through the stone foundation and into the walls. Metal tins rattled softly on shelves. Glass panes trembled just enough to be felt. Customers paused mid-sentence, listening, then continued as if nothing had happened. Ignoring things had become a survival skill. The boy, however, paid attention. He noticed soldiers carrying rolled maps, unfolding them near the rear alley before disappearing behind the stone structure. He recognized coastlines drawn in thick lines and symbols repeated again and again. He watched fingers trace routes toward the sea, stopping, pointing, arguing silently. So he added more details to his sketches. He drew the steps again, counting them carefully. He drew the crates stacked near the entrance. He drew a wire he had seen briefly stretched between poles before being taken down. The drawing grew more precise, though he still did not understand its meaning. One afternoon, a German soldier stopped near him. The soldier glanced at the paper, then at the boy. For a long moment, neither moved. Marcel watched from the bakery doorway, his hands tightening around a loaf of bread. The soldier finally smiled, laughed quietly, and walked away. The danger lingered. Soon after, a stranger entered the bakery. He wore worn civilian clothing and spoke with an unfamiliar accent. He bought bread slowly, making small talk about the weather and shortages. While Marcel wrapped the loaf, the man glanced at the counter where the boy's drawings lay. His hand moved casually. When he left, one drawing was gone. Marcel realized the loss hours later. His chest tightened as he searched the shop. Fear did not strike immediately. It crept in slowly, heavy and cold. In occupied France, information traveled quietly, passed through gestures, glances, and routine errands. Someone had seen something. That night, the trucks returned. The hum beneath the bakery intensified. Fresh concrete appeared near the rear alley, sealing cracks and smoothing edges. The stone structure looked unchanged, yet different. The secret beneath the village was tightening its grip, and far beyond the coast, in places Marcel would never see, that single missing drawing had begun its journey into the machinery of war. The folded drawing traveled quietly, passing through hands that knew how to move unnoticed. It was studied in dim rooms, unfolded carefully, and compared against other fragments of information gathered from occupied territory. No one knew the boy's name. No one needed to. The value of the sketch lay in its details, not its origin. At first, it seemed insignificant. A small structure, a set of steps, crates and wires drawn without labels. But intelligence work depended on patterns, and patterns were already forming. Reports from nearby villages mentioned similar night deliveries and unexplained power usage. Fishermen had complained of restricted coastal zones that made no sense. Farmers described soldiers guarding empty land. Separately, each detail meant little. Together, they suggested something hidden. Analysts compared the drawing to recent reconnaissance photographs. From the air, the area looked ordinary. The stone structure blended into the cliff face, shadows fell naturally, no obvious entrances were visible. Yet when measurements were taken, something felt wrong. The proportions did not match the surrounding buildings. The angles were too precise. The steps drawn by the boy descended deeper than any cellar should. Someone had built downward, not outward. Engineers consulted the sketch and nodded silently. Thick walls were implied by the shape. The placement suggested protection from bombardment. The wire hinted at communications rather than simple storage. This was not a shelter. It was a working installation. Further confirmation arrived through intercepted radio traffic. Although encrypted, the transmissions followed a predictable rhythm. Messages spiked during naval movements and coastal drills. Their origin could not be pinpointed exactly, but triangulation narrowed the region. It matched the village. The conclusion became unavoidable. A command and communications bunker existed beneath civilian structures. Its purpose was coordination, not defense. It connected artillery positions, patrol craft, and observation posts along the coast. If active during an invasion, it could direct fire with deadly efficiency. The discovery posed a dilemma. Destroying the bunker too early would alert German command. Sabotage could lead to brutal reprisals against civilians. Silence, however, allowed the bunker to remain operational. The decision was made to observe, not interfere. Resistance groups in the area were instructed to gather information quietly. No attacks, no disturbances. Civilian routines were to remain unchanged. The bunker's greatest weakness was that its existence was still unknown to its builders. Back in the village, Marcel felt the pressure rising without understanding why. German soldiers appeared more alert, more guarded. New personnel arrived carrying equipment unfamiliar to locals. Antennas were erected briefly at night, then dismantled before morning. The boy noticed everything. He no longer sketched openly. His drawings stayed folded in his bag. He sensed that something had changed, though no one explained it to him. War had entered his world without announcing itself. Unknowingly, the village had provided intelligence that could shape future operations. A structure built to remain invisible had been revealed through patience, observation, and an accidental act of honesty. And now the waiting began. Secrecy always breeds suspicion, and by early 1944, German authorities along the coast were growing uneasy. Orders arrived demanding tighter security and renewed vigilance. Counterintelligence officers began appearing in villages without notice, asking careful questions with carefully neutral expressions. No one was accused. No one was cleared. Marcel was summoned for questioning. The interview took place in a converted municipal office, its walls stripped of decoration. A German officer asked about deliveries, suppliers, and unusual activity. His tone was polite, almost bored, which made it more frightening. Marcel answered slowly, choosing words that revealed nothing. He spoke of flour, ration cards, and weather. Then the question shifted. Had he seen strangers? Had his son spent time near soldiers? Did anyone sketch or write things down? Marcel felt his throat tighten, but kept his face still. He said, "His boy drew buildings and animals, nothing more." The officer nodded, made a note, and dismissed him. The boy was warned not to draw outside again. For a time, he obeyed. Behind the bakery, the Germans began sealing the rear alley. Fresh concrete was poured at night, filling gaps and covering seams. Steps that once descended into darkness vanished beneath smooth stone. The entrance was disguised carefully, reshaped to mimic natural rock. Within days, it appeared as if nothing had ever been there. The bunker was being erased from sight. Patrols increased. Guards rotated frequently. Soldiers watched the village with narrowed eyes, as if expecting something to break. Marcel felt the weight of attention pressing down on him. Even the ovens seemed louder now, the hum beneath the floor harder to ignore. One evening, A German officer lingered outside the bakery after closing. He watched the boy carefully, his gaze sharp and measuring. The message was clear. Someone suspected something, even if they did not yet understand what it was. Marcel considered sending his son away to relatives inland, but movement itself invited questions. Then, just as abruptly, the pressure eased. Orders arrived. Units packed equipment. Some of the specialists disappeared overnight. Conversations shifted northward. Maps now pointed toward other sectors of the coast. Whatever threat the bunker had posed, it no longer held priority. The village breathed again, though cautiously. Marcel did not know that Allied planners already possessed what they needed. The bunker's position, purpose, and vulnerabilities had been recorded. Destroying it now was unnecessary. Neutralizing it later would be enough. For the boy, the danger passed without explanation. He returned to ordinary concerns, unaware of how close he had come to consequences he could not imagine. The bunker remained silent, hidden once more, but its fate had already been decided far from the village, in rooms filled with maps, calculations, and plans for a moment that would soon change the world forever. In the early hours of June 1944, the Channel coast trembled with distant thunder. It was not the weather, it was artillery. Warships filled the horizon, their silhouettes dark against a pale sky. Aircraft roared overhead in endless waves, and parachutes blossomed inland like pale flowers drifting toward Earth. The invasion had begun. What history would later call Operation Overlord was unfolding with brutal precision. Along the German-held coast, command centers struggled to respond. Telephone lines went dead. Radio signals overlapped and vanished. Orders arrived too late or not at all. Units waited for instructions that never came. Confusion spread faster than clarity. Beneath the village bakery, the hidden bunker came alive. Inside, German officers moved quickly through narrow concrete corridors. Radios crackled with broken transmissions. Operators adjusted dials, attempting to re-establish contact with artillery. Batteries and naval patrols. Maps were unfolded across metal tables, their markings already outdated. The bunker had been built to survive bombardment. What it could not survive was isolation. Allied airstrikes, guided by months of intelligence gathering, targeted communication lines rather than concrete walls. Cables buried deep underground were severed. Relay stations farther along the coast were destroyed within minutes. The bunker's antennas, briefly raised under cover of darkness, were spotted and eliminated. Silence followed. Inside the bunker, the realization came slowly. Messages sent received no reply. Calls for coordination went unanswered. The command post, once central to coastal defense, had become a sealed chamber cut off from the war outside. The officers waited. Hours passed. The ground shook from distant explosions. Smoke drifted into ventilation shafts, carrying the smell of burning fuel and salt air. The men inside understood the truth before it was spoken aloud. They were blind. Above ground, Allied forces pushed inland. German artillery fired sporadically, uncoordinated and ineffective. Positions that should have been reinforced were abandoned. Others fought alone, unaware of the broader collapse unfolding around them. The village itself saw little of the battle. Marcel opened the bakery days later under a different sky. German soldiers were gone. Allied troops passed through briefly, moving with urgency, barely noticing the stone buildings or the quiet civilians watching from doorways. No one mentioned the bunker. It remained sealed, its purpose already spent. Allied engineers would later confirm its existence, noting its sophisticated design and careful concealment. It had been a valuable asset, rendered useless at the critical moment. The climax of its story was not an explosion or a firefight. It was silent. A silence made possible because months earlier, a child had drawn what he saw and someone far away had paid attention. History. rarely announces itself. Sometimes it simply disconnects the wires. After the fighting moved inland and the coast was secured, Allied investigators began the quiet work of documentation. Bunkers, tunnels, and command posts were catalogued carefully, measured, photographed, and compared against intelligence reports gathered before the invasion. Many installations surprised even seasoned officers. Some were larger than expected, others were more cleverly hidden. The bunker beneath the village bakery was listed as a secondary coastal command and communications post. German records recovered later confirmed its role. It had coordinated artillery fire, monitored naval movements, and relayed information along the coast. Its location beneath civilian structures had been chosen deliberately, relying on the assumption that ordinary life would mask extraordinary activity. In that sense, the design had been successful. What failed was the human factor. The bunker had not been exposed by espionage, infiltration, or betrayal. No spy had penetrated its walls. No resistance fighter had sabotaged its entrance. Instead, it had been revealed through accumulation, small observations layered over time, patterns noticed by people with no training, no agenda, and nothing to gain. Historians would later recognize this as a recurring weakness in German occupation strategy. The Nazi system depended heavily on secrecy enforced through fear. Civilians learned to look away. Adults trained themselves to ignore irregularities, but children did not share those instincts. They observed repetition without understanding its danger. They remembered details without filtering them for safety. In occupied Europe, such details often became the raw material of intelligence. Allied planners increasingly valued civilian reports, even accidental ones. Farmers described roads that vibrated at night. Shopkeepers noticed unusual deliveries. Children sketched buildings that did not belong. When combined with aerial photography and signal interception, these fragments created a clearer picture than any single source could provide. The bakery bunker never fired a decisive shot during the invasion. Its neutralization helped reduce coordinated German response in its sector, limiting artillery effectiveness and slowing reinforcement. This contributed, in a small but meaningful way, to Allied forces establishing and expanding their foothold. War is often explained through grand strategies and decisive battles, but its outcomes are shaped just as much by unnoticed moments. The boy's drawing did not win the war. It did not change history on its own, yet it played a role in a larger system that depended on thousands of similar moments. Intelligence is rarely dramatic. It grows quietly, fed by patience and attention. The village returned to normal life after liberation. The bunker remained sealed, its existence fading into memory. To locals, it became another silent scar left behind by occupation. For historians, it became a reminder that even the most carefully hidden structures are vulnerable, that secrecy cannot account for curiosity, and that sometimes the smallest witnesses leave the clearest traces. After the war ended, the village slowly returned to a quieter rhythm. German signs were removed, patrols disappeared, roads once restricted were walked freely again, though people did so carefully, as if permission might suddenly be revoked. The bakery reopened fully, its windows no longer darkened, its ovens burning without fear of inspection. Marcel resumed his routine. He baked before dawn, greeted neighbors by name, and listened as news replaced rumors. He never spoke about the years of occupation in detail. Like many civilians, he believed survival required forgetting as much as remembering. The rear of the bakery remained sealed, its stone surface smoothed and weathered by time. Few asked what lay beneath. The boy grew older. School returned. Drawing became less important. He remembered the trucks and soldiers as fragments of childhood, not as moments of significance. No one ever told him what his sketches had revealed. To him, the war ended quietly, without explanation or ceremony. Years later, Allied and German archives were opened to historians. Documents confirmed the existence of the bunker beneath the village, listing its construction dates, assigned units, and operational purpose. It appeared only briefly in post-war studies, overshadowed by larger installations and famous battles. There was no plaque, no museum, no marker to indicate what had once existed there. Yet its story endured. Military historians noted how civilian environments had been used to shield military assets. Intelligence analysts studied the case as an example of accidental observation influencing operational planning. The lesson was simple and enduring. No system of secrecy is perfect when ordinary life continues above it. The bunker was never reopened. Concrete and steel remained buried, slowly decaying in darkness. Nature reclaimed the cliffs. The village expanded slightly, adding new houses and shops. Children played where soldiers once stood guard, unaware of what had passed beneath their feet. For Marcel, the war became something he had lived through, not something he discussed. For his son, it became a distant chapter in history books, disconnected from his own memories. Only later, as an adult, would he learn that a drawing made out of boredom had once traveled far beyond his village. The legacy of the bunker is not found in ruins or monuments. It exists in the reminder that history is shaped quietly, that wars are influenced not only by generals and weapons, but by observation, routine, and chance, that children, often overlooked, can notice what others ignore. In World War II, countless secrets were hidden beneath ordinary lives. Most remained buried. One did not, because a schoolboy drew what he saw, and someone else understood what it meant. And in that small exchange, the machinery of war shifted slightly, proving that even in the darkest times, truth can surface in the most unexpected ways.